My name is Doug, and I've spent a lot, and I mean a lot, of time camping, hiking, and hunting. I've seen all types of predators and have been in some situations that were a pain in the ass to get out of. I've spent nearly 10 plus years in the outdoors and never once had a reason to feel afraid. However, that all changed in just one evening. It was the middle of November, and I was on my annual hunting trip in rural Georgia. This was around the time deer hunting season was open, which meant big game for the hunters. I've shot plenty of deer, hogs, and even elk, and had gotten pretty good at the use of my aim throughout the years. I had decided to go on a hunting trip to look for a buck, as they were considered as the jackpot around here. There had been an increase of deer population in the area, so I wasn't sure as to why it was hard to find one. I had been out here for a good 2 hours and hadn't seen anything, so I thought about calling it a night. At one point, I'm out scanning the trees with my rifle when I finally see one. It wasn't the biggest one, but it was a pretty decent size for an average hunter like me. I look through the scope of my gun with my finger on the trigger, getting ready to shoot when all of a sudden the buck bolts. Now, most would have assumed it saw me, but it wasn't looking in my direction. Something else had spooked it. I assumed it was maybe a bear or a mountain lion as it was getting dark out. That was my cue to get out of there, and I packed up my things, getting ready to leave. That's when I look up and saw a set of eye shines about 15 feet away from where the buck had been. It was practically dark out by now, but whatever it was massive. Bigger than a coyote, a mountain lion, or any bear I knew of. The eyes were about 4 to 5 feet off of the ground, staring directly at me. Whatever it was completely shook me, as I've spent nearly 12 years studying the outdoors and wildlife. Out of those 12 years, I've never once seen anything like this. After what seemed like hours of staring at this thing, I slowly lifted my gun and proceeded to shoot in the direction of it to scare it off. I looked through my scope once again, where I could very clearly see its eyes and what looked to be faint black hairs around it. Other than that, it was too dark to see anything else. I take the shot and whatever it was took off in the opposite direction. I just stood there in horror and listened as this animal ran through the woods with branches snapping left and right. What made the situation even more terrifying was the fact that I never heard it coming when it spooked the deer. It was silent, almost as if it was never there to begin with. I thankfully made it back to the main roads and never went hunting for a while. Some nights I still do my best to describe what I saw, but no one seemed to relate to it even online. I guess this just goes to show you how vast and unexplored the woods actually are. We don't really know what's out there. A few years ago, I used to be a scout leader for a Boy Scout troop in Iowa City, Iowa. I was mainly one of the leaders who taught the scouts basic survival tips and the do's and don'ts when out camping. I was never paid, but I enjoyed the experience and loved what I did. One day, our troop had taken a camping trip up to one of Iowa's national parks. It was a pretty decent scenery with trees, mountains, rivers, etc. We had unpacked everything fairly quickly, and we still had a good 2 hours of daylight left. With nothing to do, I had decided to take a few of the older kids for a quick hunting lesson that I hoped they'd be thrilled about. Thankfully, most of them already knew the basics of firearm use, so I had decided to bring them along. Because it was their first time, I had decided to use the deer hunting tower hidden deeper into the woods as a good first experience. We walk up the stairs to the tower and we could see the whole park from how high up we were. I had given one of the scouts a basic style hunting rifle and showed him the basics of how hunting works. The others watched him as I helped him hold the gun and told him when to fire. However, that's when I looked down at the corner of my eye and see someone walking past a few trees from down below. From the looks of it, I could tell he wasn't another scout or a leader, as this person wore all black carrying what looked like a shovel. I told the scouts to be quiet as I saw this person proceed to shovel dirt on top of something. However, with the trees blocking most of my view, it was too difficult to see just what this something was. What happened next was probably one of the biggest mistakes I've ever made. I loudly yelled out, "Hey, who are you?" Almost immediately, they turned to look up at me and instantly flee in the opposite direction. I told the scouts that we had to leave as something told me that we weren't in the best situation. We all climbed down and walked back to camp where I had told the scoutmaster. When I told him, he got a horrified look on his face and told everyone that we had to cut the trip short. The last thing I remember was the sheriff showing up at the front of the park questioning me and the scoutmaster. I told them what I knew and they told me they'd look into it. It's been 4 years now, and I haven't heard anything of it. The scoutmaster and I don't like to talk about it till this day, but it still leaves me with 3 unanswered questions. Why did he have a shovel? Why did he flee? And what was it that he was burying in the ground? That one still sticks with me. I live in the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains of northeast Georgia. It's a beautiful place to camp and has some pretty interesting views to admire. Anyway, it was the middle of October and I was going hunting with my son, who was 10 at the time, for his first hunting lesson. Growing up, learning how to use guns, I wanted to teach my son the same way. Some might argue that 10 is too young to be learning how to shoot, but he was mature and knew not to touch a gun when I was around. I taught him the basics of firearm use, and he seemed to understand it fairly well. My original plan was to use the deer hunting tower hidden deeper into the woods, but figured it was too advanced for him. Anyway, we're hiking for about 2 hours with plenty of food and water when I spot a large buck about a football field away. I tell my son to get out his .22 and guided him through the steps one last time and went to take the shot. So there he is, aiming his gun at the deer when he fires and misses way off. Just as I was about to say something to him, I notice a man emerging from behind a large tree about 10 feet away. I give him a quick wave and tell my son that we were moving to another spot. As I said this, the man begins to follow behind while still keeping his distance. Let me point out that seeing someone this deep into the woods wasn't common, and this guy wasn't wearing anything that even resembled a hiker or a hunter. Long story short, we kept moving along the trail, watching the autumn leaves begin to fall off the trees and onto the ground. My son then began to ask me as to who that man was, to which I told him I didn't know and to just ignore him. As we were walking, I then hear footsteps crunching in the leaves from behind me. I stop and take a deep breath to compose myself and turn around to see the same man with this unsettling grin across his face. At this point, I could tell that my son was getting a bit freaked out, as was I. In an annoyed tone, I tell him to leave us alone and that we were armed. However, this didn't seem to faze him as he kept standing there with the same grin. As if things couldn't get any worse, I see 4 other men appear from behind trees, all of them wearing masks of some sort. One of them was holding a large axe while the others had bats. At this point, fighting them off was pointless, and so I grabbed my son's arm, running as fast as we could, praying to God that they weren't following us. All the while, I could have sworn I heard rapid footsteps from behind us, but didn't want to look and just focused on running. Within a matter of minutes, we made it to the parking lot with thankfully nobody behind us. My son and I get into the truck and drive off before it got dark. Needless to say, my wife wasn't happy at all, and she refused to let my son go hunting with me anymore. 2 weeks go by, and I'm at the kitchen table drinking coffee while watching the news when I see a chilling news report. The news had talked about unexplained deaths in the same forest that my son and I were at. As the story goes, a couple were camping in those woods about 2 weeks ago when their camp was raided after coming back from a hike. This apparently caused them to become distracted by cleaning up the belongings when someone stabs the wife from behind. Wife dies instantly, and the husband was then knocked out cold, and that's why he was able to tell the story. This same process continued with other locals in the area before the authorities decided to do an investigation. They showed who the suspect was, and when they did, I immediately felt a chill run down my spine. It was the same man we had seen while hunting, and police had found him and arrested him along with 3 other men. I wasn't sure what happened to the other one, but the story went around like crazy and was all over the newspapers for the next month. Till this day, I'm not sure as to what their intentions were or why they confronted us, and I never found out. But if they had weapons, they obviously weren't good. It was profoundly terrifying.